The Democratic Alliance has put out a strong call to Basic Education Minister Angie to scrap rotational timetables this year and do away with the 1 meter social distance rule. Joining us now is DA Basic Education Shadow Minister, Baxolile Nodada. A very good evening to you, Mr. Nodada. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to The Full View.
Good evening, Simply, and good evening to your viewers.
You said that rotational timetables and social distancing requirements will have far-reaching consequences on pupil development, well-being and emotional health. Take us through what these consequences are.
Look, Simply, first and foremost, the rotational system was designed for it to buy time to ensure that teachers are vaccinated, one, and number two, to decrease the hospitalization. So if we continue with the rotational system, already learners have lost over 40% of their learning and teaching time as we speak. Worst of all, no-fee paying schools, which we know are mostly in poor areas, have lost over 50 to 75% of their learning and teaching time. So meaning that a grade 3 learner by June this year would have only known what a grade 2 learner at the end of 2019 would have known. And this is going to take about 10 to 15 years for learners to recover. And if we continue to exacerbate the problem, we're also encouraging dropouts that we've seen this past year that are between 370,000 to 750,000 learners not coming back to school. So meaning we're encouraging more youth not in education, employment or training. So that's why it's important for us to review why we had the rotational system to begin with, because teachers have been given enough time for them to actually vaccinate, for us to get back to some sense of normality, especially the learning and teaching time for learners. So it's important for us to understand that that was the rationale. And now it is important for us to completely reopen because teachers have been given enough time to vaccinate. And it's proven that the vaccination actually has a lot of effect in terms of less hospitalization and less death.
What is the rationale, though, for your calls to scrap the 1 meter social distance rule? Because COVID-19 is pretty much with us, and calling for such would be in stark contrast to the COVID-19 rules.
Look, we need to listen to health and science experts. So the Ministerial Advisory Committee in July 2021 already, including experts like Professor Madi, have indicated that schools must completely reopen in July in 2021 already. And Professor Madi indicates that primary school should have reopened already because the reason why we had a rotational system is because teachers were not vaccinated, which were highly at risk of getting COVID-19 and ultimately spreading it. And them now being given enough time to vaccinate then gives an opportunity for schools to completely reopen. That's what the science and the health experts are saying. Even Nick's poll have added to that voice that there's a general consensus now that teachers are generally vaccinated. I was in Mpumalanga this past week, and I visited 2 schools, and both schools have over 95% teachers that have been vaccinated. And learners that are over the age of 12 years old have also been encouraged to vaccinate so that you can increase the sense of vaccination in a school so that you've got some sense of reopening completely for us to get back to some sense of normality. So it's not in direct contrast to what the health and science experts are saying to us and the Department of Basic Education. And the minister had put these in the directives in 2021, July already, that the primary schools will completely reopen. It's just that the regulations will not change in terms of the 1 meter social distancing. And you can't ignore that because it's legally binding for schools as well.
I mean, if your calls do succeed, and I understand that the DA has now written to the South African Human Rights Commission calling for the scrapping of the 1 meter social distance rule, are you cognizant of the Pandora's box that might be opened as a result of this?
We are completely cognizant of that. And that's why in our call we're saying that 1, teachers are being vaccinated. 2, learners over the ages of 12 years old have been encouraged to vaccinate. And the level of herd immunity in the schools have now been generally increased by teachers vaccinated. But there are much more dire consequences once we don't reopen schools fully. I'll give you another example. Learners that are going to no-fee paying schools rely, for example, on a nutritious meal that they get in school. And with the rotational period, 1, they don't get the opportunity to get that. Secondly, you would have seen recently, as SABC also reported, the high teenage pregnancy that has resulted in schools, in learners not going to school. Thirdly, I've indicated that there are high dropout rates, meaning the consequences are much more dire. And if the health and the science is saying to us, reopen schools fully, and if teachers are vaccinated based on the science and the health that we've been advised, then I see no reason why we can't scrap the 1 meter social distance and actually completely reopen schools. And those teachers that have not vaccinated, we cannot put their rights above the rights of learners to access an education. So, and having looked at the trends, you will see that there's a very high vaccination rate for teachers. So those are the people that had initially this rotational system had been put there for, and now they've been vaccinated, meaning they're in less risk. And the vaccine has proved now during the Omicron rise of infections that it actually is effective. So I think it's at the right time that we listen to health and science experts for us to completely reopen schools.
Mr. Nodada, I'm still not getting why you're calling for the scrapping of the 1 meter social distance rule, because you're essentially calling for pupils to be in close contact, which is a catalyst for the spread of this virus.
Furthermore, I just want to indicate to people that this does not come, from the top of our heads. These are health and science experts that are indicating that learners, especially of a certain age, are not necessarily affected by the virus. Some of them are carriers, and that's why they've encouraged that from 12 years old and above, those learners are encouraged to go vaccinate. But the biggest concern was that we must put a rotational system in place so that teachers are not at risk of getting the virus and ultimately are at high risk of being hospitalized or even exposed to death. Now, we have come up with, we've driven the issue that teachers must be vaccinated. We're sitting with teachers that are over 90 to 95% vaccinated in the schools that we visited. I'm in Motshekga as we speak to visit more schools this week to look at the possibility of completely reopening schools. And teachers and learners are indicating that because we have been advised by the science and health experts, we need to follow that. And we can't just simply say because there's a possibility of a complete spread that has been taken into account when this decision was made, that we must now not reopen schools at the expense of the learners, not just now in the immediate, but also in the future. So it's important for us to preserve that right of those learners and their future so that we don't end up in a situation whereby we've got a lost generation of people that maybe are not skilled, who might end up in a lifetime of poverty. So we can't just back down from that. And those precautions of wearing masks, trying to social distance, having a break in terms of your mask, those things will still apply in schools. It doesn't mean that they've been completely taken away to sanitize and so on. But what we're saying is that it can be done when schools are completely reopened because teachers are now vaccinated. Learners have got an opportunity to vaccinate, especially those that are over 12, and must follow the science and the health. We must not just make decisions based just simply on emotions.
And what's the Democratic Alliance's stance on mandatory vaccination, especially for pupils?
Look, what we can never do is force people to vaccinate. Because legally people have the right to either choose to vaccinate or not. I mean, you recently just indicated even, tennis players, international tennis players indicating that it's a right not to vaccinate. But when the law has indicated that learners have a right to education, then they have a right to education. And there's no right that is bigger than the other. And that's why it's important for us to ensure that we fully reopen schools. Those teachers that have chosen not to vaccinate, it's their right. They can do that. But they are also responsible for making sure that there's quality teaching in the classroom because that's what they're employed to do. So I don't believe that we should compel people to fully to vaccinate if they don't want to vaccinate. But I don't think we must hold anyone at ransom that is vaccinated that wants to live their life normally.
So the DA's official position is that it will not support mandatory vaccinations for students.
Repeat that again, Simpu.
And the DA's official position is that it will not support mandatory vaccinations, especially for learners.
First of all, Simpu, I just want to indicate that we are a party that believes in the rule of law. And we believe, secondly, that everybody's got a right to make to freedom of choice. If your choice is not to vaccinate, then so be it. You've got the freedom of that choice. If your choice is to vaccinate, you've got the freedom to do that. But what we're saying is that we must be responsible in doing that. If you choose not to vaccinate, you can't hold people that are vaccinated at ransom in living their lives, and vice versa. So we need to ensure that we are in an environment where we're encouraging people to vaccinate, because it's the only way we can get to some sense of normality by getting herd immunity with the target that we've been given by the Department of Health. That is what we're saying is a democratic alliance.
Baxolile Nodada, DA's Basic Education Shadow Minister, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much, and thank you to your viewers as well.
All right, thank you. That was Baxolile Nodada, and he's been speaking to us about the Democratic Alliance's position on the scrapping of the rotational learning.